The city was loud, filled with glowing signs and strange alien voices. Yet in the middle of that noise, one small child lay forgotten. His legs were weak, twisted since birth, and the only thing that helped him move was a broken wooden crutch. Every step was pain, every move was slow, and still no one stopped to help. Merchants shouted about their goods. Alien nobles rode past in hover chairs, and guards stood with sharp weapons. The child crawled in the dust, his hands shaking as he tried to lift himself again. His crutch was snapped at the top, the support gone, and every time he leaned on it, he fell hard on the cold ground. People looked at him with disgust, some whispering, useless, weak, cursed. No one offered a hand. No one gave even a piece of bread. In this empire, the strong were honored. The weak were forgotten, and for this disabled child, life was nothing but hunger, pain, and silence. But that evening, something different happened. A human man, dressed in rough work clothes, walked through the streets after a long day. His boots were dusty, his hands covered with grease from repairing machines. He was tired, ready to go home, but his eyes caught the sight of the child on the ground. He stopped, frowning. Others kept walking, but he stayed, watching the child struggle with the broken crutch. The boy's small arms trembled as he tried to pull himself up again, only to fall with a cry. The sound cut through the man's chest like a blade. Slowly, the human walked closer. The crowd glanced at him with confusion. Why was he wasting his time? The human knelt, his voice calm. "Hey, little one, don't cry." The child looked up with wide alien eyes shining with tears. His face was pale, his breath heavy, and he whispered, "It hurts. I can't walk. I can't move." The human's heart twisted. He reached for the broken crutch, turning it in his hands. It was weak, cracked, ready to shatter completely. He sighed, then smiled gently at the boy. "Don't worry. I can fix this." The child shook his head, hopeless. "No one fixes anything for me. No one cares." The human placed a hand on his shoulder, firm but kind. "Well, I care." With that, the human stood and looked around. He spotted scraps of wood near a broken stall, metal rods tossed aside and old ropes hanging loose. His hands moved quickly, collecting the pieces like he had done 1,000 times at his work. The crowd gathered now, curious, whispering about the human's strange actions. The child sat quietly, watching with wide eyes. For the first time in years, someone was doing something for him. The human bent the metal, tied the wood, wrapped the rope tight. Sweat rolled down his forehead, but his hands never stopped. He was building, shaping, creating, turning trash into hope at last. He knelt again and held out the new crutch. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't perfect, but it was strong, solid, and made with care. The human smiled. "Here, try this." The child's hands shook as he took it. He pressed the crutch into the ground and slowly rose. His legs trembled, his arms weak, but the support held firm. The crowd gasped as the child stood taller than he ever had before. Step by step he moved forward, his face lit up with joy, his tears now mixed with laughter. The human's chest warmed as he watched the boy walk. Unsteady but proud for the first time. The child's head was high, his eyes glowing. Some people whispered in awe, some in anger. Why is a human helping the weak? This is against the way of the strong. But the boy did not hear them. He turned to the human and whispered, "Thank you." The human smiled and ruffled the child's hair. "Don't thank me, little one, just keep walking." The moment was small, but it was powerful in a city where no one cared. One human had stopped. One human had built hope. Yet in the shadows of the street, a guard had been watching, his eyes narrowed, his hand already reaching for a communicator. He whispered into it, "The human has interfered. He has helped the weak child." A cold voice answered on the other side, "Tell the Emperor he will not like this." The human didn't notice. He only saw the boy take another step, stronger than before but far away inside the palace. A storm was already rising, and tomorrow, the Emperor himself would demand the human's arrest. The broken child had taken his first steps, but those steps had shaken something far greater than the streets. They had shaken the throne itself. The night was cold, the streets quieter than before, but the small alien child did not care. For the first time in his life, he was walking with a real crutch, not crawling, not falling, not dragging his body through the dirt. He was moving step by step, each movement painful yet filled with pride. The human walked beside him, silent but watchful. His rough hands hung at his sides, his tired eyes soft as he glanced at the boy. The crowd had begun to fade away, some shaking their heads, others whispering in anger, but a few had stayed, their faces uncertain. They had seen something they were not used to, kindness. The child's laughter was soft at first, almost broken. Then it grew stronger, louder, echoing in the empty street. The sound shocked people more than the crutch itself. It was not the laughter of weakness. It was the laughter of someone who had just discovered hope. "Look, look," the boy shouted, his alien voice high and trembling. "I can walk. I can stand." He stumbled, but the crutch held him. He stood again and lifted his chin, his tears sparkling in the pale light. The human smiled faintly, his heart heavy and light at the same time. He had not done it for glory, not for reward. He had done it because no one else would, because he could not look at that broken child and simply walk away. From the corner of the street, other children appeared, thin, hungry, with eyes filled with despair. They watched the boy walk and their mouths opened in silent wonder. One whispered, "How? He was crawling this morning," another asked. "Who helped him? Was it magic?" The boy held up the crutch proudly. "Not magic. A human made this for me," the children gasped, their gazes turning toward the tall figure standing quietly behind him. The human shifted uneasily, unused to attention, but the boy's words spread like fire. Soon more whispers filled the air. Some adults stopped and frowned, muttering, "Dangerous, very dangerous. Helping the weak only brings trouble." Others, softer voices, dared to say, "Maybe it is good. Maybe it is mercy." The boy, however, did not hear the warnings. He was too busy walking across the square, his steps uneven but steady, his joy unshaken every step he took. The human felt the weight of 100 eyes watching. He knew this was not just about a crutch anymore. It was about a message, one that would spread. The human knelt again. Checking the crutch, he tightened the rope, adjusted the angle. "You must be careful," he told the child. "It will hold you. But you must stay strong too." The boy nodded eagerly. "I will. I will walk every day. I will get stronger." He hugged the crutch as if it were treasure, his small arms trembling for a brief moment. The human allowed himself to feel peace. Maybe this was enough. Maybe this one act would matter to no one but the boy. But deep down, he knew the Empire did not forgive such things. Helping the weak was not a kind act here. It was a crime, hidden in the shadows. The same guard from before whispered again into his communicator. "The child is showing the crutch to others now. More are gathering. This is spreading," the cold voice replied. "Good, let it spread, then tomorrow the Emperor will strike harder." The guard smirked, his eyes fixed on the human. "This fool does not know he has already signed his death." Back in the square, the boy moved to a fountain. He stood there proudly. Raising the crutch like a banner, children clapped. Some adults turned their heads away in shame. But the boy shouted again, "He helped me. The human gave me strength." The human's face flushed red, not from pride but from fear. This was too public, too loud, and the wrong ears would hear. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, his voice low. "Enough for tonight, little one, come. Let's go." But the boy shook his head, smiling with tears. "No, I want to walk more. I want everyone to see." The human hesitated, then sighed. He could not crush the child's joy. Even if it meant danger, step by step the boy walked down the street with his new crutch. The sound of the stick tapping against stone echoed in the night. It was not just the sound of wood hitting ground. It was the sound of defiance, the sound of change. Every tap was a challenge to the Empire itself. By the time the child finally grew tired and leaned against the human's arm, dozens of people had seen him walk. Dozens had heard him laugh. Dozens had whispered his name to others. The human carried the boy home at last, the crutch resting beside him like a sword. The child fell asleep quickly, still smiling. The human sat quietly, his head heavy with thought. He looked at the crutch. At his own hands, he wondered, did I save a child or did I just start a war? And far away inside the Emperor's palace, the order had already been signed. By tomorrow morning, the human would be hunted, not for building a weapon, not for starting a rebellion, but for giving a broken child the gift of hope. The palace stood high above the city, its walls glowing with silver light. Guards in black armor lined the halls, their faces hidden, their weapons sharp. Inside, whispers traveled faster than footsteps, carrying secrets from one ear to another. And tonight, the whispers carried the name of a human. The Emperor sat on his golden throne, draped in heavy robes, his crown sharp as blades, His eyes burned like cold fire, and his voice echoed in the chamber. What is this I hear? A human building something for a crippled child? His ministers lowered their heads, too afraid to answer. One brave noble finally spoke. Yes, my emperor, the story spreads in the streets. The child walks again. The emperor's fingers tightened on the armrest. Walks again. Weakness must remain weakness, that is our law. His voice was low but filled with rage. Who gave this human the right to change fate? The court trembled, no one daring to breathe too loud at last. The general of the guard stepped forward, his voice steady. The human used scraps, nothing more, but the crowd saw it as a miracle. The emperor's eyes narrowed. Miracle? Do you call weakness rising a miracle? The general fell silent, bowing deeply. The emperor rose slowly, his robe sweeping across the floor like a storm. This cannot be allowed. A human has no right to inspire, no right to teach hope. He turned to his council, his words sharp as a blade. Tomorrow we will arrest him, we will make an example, so no one else dares to lift the weak. At the edge of the chamber, some nobles exchanged glances, their eyes filled with doubt, but none spoke aloud. To question the emperor was to invite death, yet the seed of curiosity had been planted. Why would a human risk so much for a crippled child? Far from the palace, the human himself sat inside his small home. The boy lay sleeping on a thin blanket, hugging the crutch like treasure. The human watched quietly, his hands resting on his knees. He knew the risk. He knew eyes had seen, and yet he did not regret it. He whispered to himself, one act of kindness. How can it be a crime? But even as he asked, he knew the empire had never valued kindness. Strength was the only truth here. Mercy was weakness, and weakness had no place in the emperor's law. Meanwhile, in the palace courtyard, the whispers grew louder. Servants repeated the tale in secret corners. A human fixed the child's legs. He walks now. Could it be true? Some gasped with awe, others shook with fear, but all agreed on one thing. Change had started. Even if small, the emperor's daughter, hidden behind a curtain, listened as well. Her heart beat fast as she heard the story of the human. She had seen the suffering of children before, but never anyone daring enough to help them. Her eyes shone with a strange fire, a thought she dared not speak. Perhaps this human is braver than all my father's generals. Back in the streets, the boy had woken. He showed the crutch proudly to other children. Look, I can walk now. Because he helped me. His voice was filled with joy, his small hands shaking with excitement. Some children touched the crutch with awe, their faces bright with hope. The human watched from the doorway, knowing each word was dangerous from the shadows. A cloaked figure studied the scene. It was the same guard who had sent word to the palace. He smirked coldly, whispering to himself, Enjoy your steps, little one. Tomorrow they will take your human away. Night deepened, and the city grew silent. But inside the emperor's chamber, silence was broken by anger. Bring him to me, the emperor ordered. Drag him through the streets if you must. Let all see what happens when weakness is fed. His voice was iron, his heart colder than stone. The nobles bowed, the guards obeyed, but still whispers spread. The more the emperor tried to crush the story, the more it grew. By morning, not only children but also workers, merchants, even beggars were repeating it. The human helped the child walks, and somewhere deep in the palace, a young servant whispered quietly, If a human can give hope, maybe we can too. The words were soft, but they carried a dangerous spark. By dawn, the order was clear. Soldiers would march to the human's home. They would seize him, chain him, and present him before the emperor's court. But none of them knew one thing. The broken child was already planning to follow, and his small steps would shake the palace more than any army could. The whispers had started, and whispers could grow louder than the emperor's roar. The sun had barely risen when the city awoke to tension in the air. Merchants opened their stalls, but their voices were quieter than usual. Mothers pulled their children closer, whispering about the emperor's orders, and soldiers in black armor marched down the streets, their boots striking the stone like thunder. Inside a small corner house, the human stirred from a restless night, his hands still sore from work, his mind heavy with worry. The child was already awake, clutching the crutch and smiling weakly. Look, he whispered, I can walk to the door. I can walk to you. His eyes were bright with pride. The human smiled faintly, though his heart carried fear. He knew deep inside that kindness never went unseen in this empire, and punishment was always harsher than mercy. Still, he bent down, checked the crutch again, and patted the child's head. "You are strong," he said softly. "Stronger than anyone sees." The child's face lit up, his steps shaky but determined. Then it came. A heavy knock, deep and sharp, rattling the wooden frame. The boy froze, his smile fading. The human's chest tightened. Another knock, louder this time. Then the sound of armored fists pounding against the door. The child whispered, trembling, "Who is it?" But the human already knew soldiers. He motioned for the boy to stay back, but the child clung to his arm. The door burst open, splinters flying, and black armored soldiers filled the small room. Their spears glowed with red energy, their eyes cold behind their helmets. "The human," one barked, "by order of the Emperor." "You are under arrest," the boy cried out, stepping forward with his crutch. "No, he helped me, he saved me, please don't take him." The soldiers ignored him. Two of them grabbed the human's arms. Pulling him hard, he did not fight, though he could have. His muscles were strong from years of labor. But he knew resistance would only bring pain to the child. "Wait," the boy shouted again, his voice cracking. He hobbled forward, standing between the soldiers and the human. Tears streamed down his pale face as he cried, "Why?" "He only helped me." "Why arrest him?" The leader sneered. "Because he broke the law of strength. He dared to lift the weak." His voice was filled with scorn. "To the Emperor. This is defiance." The boy clutched the crutch with both hands, his small frame shaking. "I don't care about your laws," he shouted. "He gave me legs, he gave me hope." The room went silent for a moment. Even some soldiers shifted uneasily. But the leader barked, "Silence the child." One soldier raised his hand to strike. The human's rage burned at last. He stepped forward, chains biting into his wrists, and stood between the soldier and the boy. His voice was calm but thunderous. "Touch him, and you'll regret it." The soldier hesitated, his hand trembling for a second before lowering. The leader scowled, pushing the human forward. "Take him!" Let the Emperor deal with this foolish mercy. Neighbors had gathered outside now. Whispers filled the street as the soldiers dragged the human through the dust. Some spat in fear, others looked away. But a few, very few, watched with quiet respect. The boy followed, limping on his crutch, his face wet with tears. "Please don't take him, please." He cried again and again. The soldiers pushed him aside, but he stumbled back to his feet. His small body refused to give up. He hobbled after them, step by step. The crowd gasped at his courage. The human glanced back, his heart breaking at the sight. "Go home, little one," he called, his voice heavy. But the boy shook his head violently. "No! You gave me strength, now I'll walk with you." The soldiers shoved the human onto a transport cart. Chains rattled as the door slammed shut. The boy slammed his crutch against the wood, shouting, "You can't take him, he's not guilty." The leader looked down at him with a smirk. "Child, the Emperor decides guilt, not you." Then the cart rolled forward, leaving dust and silence behind. The boy collapsed to his knees, clutching the crutch tight. His tears fell into the dirt, but then he looked up, his eyes blazing with something new, defiance. If the Emperor thought he could silence hope, he was wrong. The boy stood again, wiping his tears. He whispered to himself, "I will follow. I will not let him stand alone." The city around him trembled with rumors. The Emperor's name was feared, but the boy's voice, though small, carried a spark, and sparks, once lit, could grow into fire. By nightfall, the news spread everywhere. The human who built a crutch had been taken to the palace. The child who could not walk now followed him, and whispers turned into questions. Questions the Emperor would not be able to silence. The knock on the door had changed everything. What began as kindness was now the beginning of rebellion. The palace gates opened with a groan, taller than towers. Carved with symbols of power inside, the human was dragged across shining floors, chains clinking with every step. The walls glowed with crystal light, and the air smelled of incense and fear. Nobles lined the chamber, their eyes cold, some curious, some hateful. At the end of the hall, the Emperor sat upon his golden throne. His robes glittered, his crown sharp as knives, his gaze heavy as iron. He looked down at the chained human as if staring at dirt. "So," he said, his voice like thunder, "this is the creature who dares to defy me." The human stood tall despite the chains. He did not bow, he did not kneel, his eyes steady. He answered calmly, "I fixed a broken stick for a child." "That is all," the nobles gasped. Such boldness before the Emperor was rare. The Emperor's lips curled in disgust. "You call it a stick." "I call it rebellion," whispers spread through the court. "A human? Brave enough to speak like this? Foolish, he will be executed." Yet a few voices softer whispered something else. He gave a child hope. Suddenly, the sound of wooden taps echoed in the chamber. Tap, tap. The doors swung open and the small alien child hobbled in. His crutch clutched tightly, his thin body trembling but unbroken. Gasps filled the hall. No weak child had ever dared enter the Emperor's court. "Stop him." The general barked, but the boy cried out, "No!" "I will speak." His voice cracked but carried across the chamber. He walked, each step shaking yet steady, and he stood beside the human, his head held high. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "You dare interrupt my court, cripple?" The boy trembled, but he raised the crutch like a sword. "I dare," he whispered, then louder, "because he saved me. He gave me strength when all of you turned away." The nobles froze, some in shock, others in anger. Never had anyone spoken so boldly in this chamber. The boy's voice shook, but his words were fire. "You call me weak, but he made me walk. You call him guilty, but he gave me life." The Emperor's hand twitched on the armrest. "Enough," he thundered. "Weakness is not life, it is poison. And this human has spread it." He raised his hand, ready to give the order for death. The human clenched his fists, ready to face it. But before the words could leave the Emperor's lips, something happened. More footsteps echoed, soft at first, then many. Children, thin, broken, crippled, entered the chamber, each with a makeshift crutch. Some bent from wood, some tied with rope. The court gasped louder now. The boy had not come alone, he had brought them all. One girl with a twisted arm lifted her crutch. "He helped us," another boy with scarred legs cried. "We can stand because of him." Voices rose together, shaky but strong. "He gave us hope. He gave us strength." The Emperor's face darkened, fury burning in his eyes. "Silence them. Remove them at once," he roared. But the guards hesitated, for the sight was powerful. Children standing tall where once they crawled. A human in chains, yet stronger than the throne itself. The nobles whispered frantically, "Is this weakness or is this power? If hope spreads, even the Emperor cannot stop it." Some lowered their eyes. Ashamed, others hid their trembling hands. The human looked at the children, pride shining through his exhaustion. He whispered softly, "Stand tall, little ones. No matter what happens." The boy beside him gripped his hand, refusing to let go. Together they faced the Emperor. The chamber had changed. It was no longer only the Emperor's court. It was now a battlefield between cruelty and compassion. And the nobles felt the weight of choice pressing on their hearts. The Emperor stood, his voice rising like a storm. "Mercy is weakness, kindness is death, and those who spread it shall be crushed." But as he spoke, his voice trembled ever so slightly. For the first time, he felt something he had not in years. Not fear of armies, not fear of rivals, but fear of a spark he could not control. The boy shouted back, his thin frame shaking. "Then call me weak, call me cursed, but I will never bow to cruelty again." The chamber shook with his words. The human smiled faintly at the child's courage, and the nobles stared in silence, because they had just witnessed something greater than the throne itself. The trial was not over, but the Emperor knew. His command would no longer be enough. The crowd outside the palace had gathered too, waiting to hear the fate of the human, and whispers had already become fire. The Emperor's hand trembled on the armrest. He wanted to crush them all. Yet he felt the balance slipping. He growled, "This ends tomorrow." But deep inside he knew it had already begun. The court was silent as the human was dragged away again, but this time he did not walk alone. He walked with the hearts of every child he had lifted, and the Emperor's throne felt just a little less unshakable. The palace did not sleep that night. Guards whispered at their posts. Servants hurried with nervous hands. Nobles argued in hushed voices. The trial had shaken everyone. For the Emperor's words no longer sounded as strong as before. And outside the palace, crowds gathered in the dark, waiting for news of the human and the children. In the dungeon below, the human sat chained to the wall. His back ached, his wrists bled from iron cuffs. Yet his spirit was steady. He thought of the child, of the little crutch, of the smile that had once been filled only with pain. He whispered to himself, "If I must fall, let it be for giving hope." Up above, the small alien child sat outside the locked chamber doors. Guards tried to push him away, but he refused to leave. He leaned on his crutch, thin arms shaking, his face pale with exhaustion. "I won't go," he said. "Not until they free him," one guard growled. "You are weak, boy. You will starve here." The boy lifted his head, his voice trembling but fierce. "Then I will starve, but I will not bow." The guard turned his eyes away, unsettled, for the child's words carried more strength than his weapon. By morning, more children arrived, each one broken, each one carrying a crutch the human had shaped. They limped, stumbled, and crawled through the palace gates. But none were turned away because their numbers grew too many. The steps of the palace echoed with the sound of wood on stone. Tap, tap, tap like a drumbeat of defiance inside the court. The emperor stormed. "Why are they here? Why do they gather like insects?" His general bowed low. "They say they will not leave. They say the human must live." The emperor's face twisted with rage. "Children challenging me? This is treason." He marched to the balcony and looked down at the square. Hundreds had gathered now, not only children but workers, servants and merchants. The children stood in the front, holding their crutches like banners. One small voice shouted, "Give him back." "He gave us hope." Others joined, weak voices rising into a storm. "Free the human." "Free him!" The emperor's roar silenced them for a moment. "You dare defy your emperor? You dare raise your voices against the law?" But then the boy stepped forward, his crutch raised high. "Yes!" he cried, his voice shaking but filled with fire. "I defy you because your law left us crawling. Your throne left us starving." Gasps filled the court. Nobles clutching their robes, guards shifting uneasily. The child's eyes burned with tears. But he did not stop. "He gave us legs, he gave us strength. He gave us more than you ever did." His voice cracked, but his words echoed across the chamber. "We are weak, but we will stand, even if it breaks us." The emperor's hand trembled, though he hid it behind rage. "Strength builds empires, not pity," he growled. But the nobles whispered among themselves. "Perhaps strength is not only in fists. Perhaps hope itself is power." The boy pointed his crutch toward the throne. "If kindness is weakness, then weakness is stronger than your throne." The words cut deeper than any sword. The court fell silent, the emperor's breath heavy. Then something no one expected happened. A noblewoman rose, her voice trembling. I cannot stay silent. My own child was born weak and I hid her in shame, but if a human can lift them, why can't we?" Another noble stood, then another. Voices rose, some for the emperor, some for the children. The chamber had split. The emperor roared, "Enough! Guards, silence them all!" But the guards hesitated, their eyes darting between the throne and the children. Some lowered their weapons, unwilling to strike. The emperor's command no longer carried the same weight. At that moment, the dungeon doors opened. The human was dragged back into the court, chains rattling. He looked broken, but his eyes lit up when he saw the crowd of children. They shouted his name, weak voices strong together. "Stand tall! Stand tall!" The boy ran forward, clutching his hand. "We will not let them take you," he said. Tears streaming down his face, the human knelt, pressing his forehead to the child's. "You are already stronger than I ever was," he whispered. The emperor raised his hand again, his voice like a storm. "This ends now. He dies at dawn and every crutch will burn." The crowd gasped. The children cried out, but none stepped back. None dropped their crutches. The boy lifted his again, shouting with all his strength, "Then you will burn us too, because we will not let go of hope." The chamber shook with their voices, the crutches pounding the floor like drums of war. Tap, tap, tap echoing against the golden walls. For the first time, the emperor looked out at his people and felt the throne beneath him tremble. Not from armies, not from blades, but from the defiance of children who refused to bow. The child's defiance had become everyone's, and the emperor knew this battle could not be won with fear alone. The golden hall shook with the pounding of crutches on the floor. Tap, 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 louder and louder. Children who once crawled now stood tall, their voices rising together. "Free him! Free the human!" The emperor sat on his throne, his face twisted with fury. Yet behind his eyes flickered something he had not felt in years. Doubt. He slammed his fist on the armrest, his voice thundering. "You dare to defy me? I am your emperor, I am the law." But the crowd did not bow. The children raised their crutches higher, the people behind them shouted louder. "We bow to kindness, not cruelty." The boy with the first crutch stepped forward, his body trembling but his voice clear. "You sit on a throne of fear. But fear cannot chain hope. The emperor's crown seemed heavy on his head. His generals shifted uneasily. His nobles whispered frantically. Some looked away in shame. Others nodded in secret agreement with the child. The guards held their spears, but their hands shook. No one dared strike the children. The human, still chained, lifted his head. His voice was calm, steady, unshaken. You call me guilty for building a crutch. But this, he gestured toward the children, this is no crime. This is life. The hall fell silent at his words. Even the emperor clenched his jaw tighter. Unable to answer at once, the boy clung to the human's arm. He gave us strength when you gave us nothing, he cried. If you kill him, then you kill us all. Because we will never crawl again. Gasps filled the court at his defiance. The child had just challenged the most powerful ruler in the empire. The emperor rose slowly, robes sweeping across the marble floor. He towered over the court, his shadow heavy. Then so be it, he growled. If weakness chooses rebellion, I will crush rebellion with fire. He raised his hand to give the order. But before the command could leave his lips, a nobleman stepped forward. His voice was shaky, but he spoke. My emperor, if you kill the human, you kill more than him. You kill hope itself, another noble added. And without hope, the empire will rot. The emperor's face darkened, his rage boiling, but he could see it now. His court was divided. His people were no longer silent. The more he roared, the stronger their voices grew, and the human, standing in chains, had done what armies could not. The boy raised his crutch again. If kindness is weakness, then weakness is stronger than your throne. The words echoed, bouncing off the golden walls like thunder. The crowd outside the palace picked it up, shouting, Weakness is stronger. Weakness is stronger. The emperor's hand trembled. He could order the guards to strike, but would they obey? He could demand silence, but would the voices stop? For the first time, he felt the weight of his power cracking. And it was not an army breaking it, it was a human, a child, and the sound of wooden crutches at last. The emperor sank back onto his throne, his voice low, sharp, but shaken. Release him, he commanded. Gasps filled the chamber. The chains fell from the human's wrists. The children rushed forward, surrounding him like a shield. Tears ran down their faces, but their smiles shone brighter than the palace lights. The human looked at the emperor, his voice calm. You call this mercy, but it is fear. Fear of what cannot be stopped, hope spreads, emperor. And hope cannot be chained. The emperor glared but said nothing. He waved his hand, ending the trial. The court emptied in silence, but whispers filled the halls like wildfire. Whispers of a human who had stood against a throne. Whispers of children who had dared to defy. Whispers of a spark that could not be killed outside. The crowd roared as the human stepped into the sunlight. The boy walked beside him, crutch tapping proudly. Others followed, children limping, crawling, stumbling, but walking forward. The people bowed not to the emperor, but to the human in chains who had given them freedom without lifting a sword. That night the city did not sleep. Stories spread to every corner. A human built a crutch, and an empire trembled. Fires burned in hearts that had long been cold, and even in the smallest homes, parents whispered to their children, Do not be afraid. Even the weakest can rise. The human returned to his small house. The boy sat beside him, smiling proudly. You are free, he whispered, because we stood together. The human looked at the crutch leaning against the wall. It was simple, rough, made of scraps, yet it had carried more power than the emperor's golden crown. He smiled faintly, placing his hand on the boy's shoulder. This is not the end, little one, he said softly. This is only the beginning. And as the stars shone over the empire, the emperor sat on his throne, but for the first time in his rule, he was the one who felt chained. The human had given more than a crutch. He had given a legacy. One act of kindness had shaken a throne, and no empire would ever be the same again.